Alright, we want to talk a little bit about cockpit interior detailing. And what I did was just a real kind of a basic cockpit layout where I'm not sure how much light is getting in there, so I apologize in advance for that. But in the cockpit on the right hand side I have put the oxygen regulator hose, the regulator itself, the hose, and then the map case, the map box or document case down there on the right hand side of the pilot seat. And there's our cockpit panel. You can see the seat and headrest, obviously. And then on this side we have the left-hand cockpit wall, and in there I went with the breaker box down at the bottom. You can almost make it out there. Breaker switches and so on, and then there's the throttle quadrant with the mixture, prop control, throttle lever, and boost control. Down below that you see the landing gear lever, and then on top of the landing gear lever that's the flap actuator. So there's a few other bits and parts that should be included here, but I think for the most part that's about it. I can just fit the pilot in. I was becoming concerned that if I kept populating the cockpit I might not be able to get our intrepid aviator seated, so we're going to leave it at that. As you can see, he takes up quite a bit of the space and definitely blocks a lot of visibility into the lower regions of the cockpit floor. Also, you'll see that the way they positioned the pilot's arms and hands, reading the P-47 manual, they talk about the oxygen mask and the regulator and icing inside the mask. So they would remind pilots to periodically reach up and squeeze the rubber mask to break loose any frost or ice that might accumulate inside the mask at altitude. It's interesting, and then here we have our pilot pose doing just that. And then on the other hand, we'd be holding the control stick, and I thought of making a control stick and then drilling that out, making his hand hollow basically. But then you run into all kinds of fit issues. If you don't get that quite right, I may not be able to get him seated there. So I'm just going to leave it like this with no column, or possibly with one that I can pull out. And that way if I remove the pilot for a static display, parked as it would be on a ramp, I could just drop the control yoke in there and remove the pilot. So I don't know if I'll do all that. I don't think I will. I think we'll just cement him in place right here and call the cockpit good. Of course, we'll have to paint the aviator first. So going about the process of making the bits and pieces using photographic references and using these kit provided cardstock with the canopy sidewalls basically represented in drawings. This gives me kind of a roadmap for at least to make sure that the sizes of the parts that I made would fit. So I just use them as that kind of reference. We took the photographs, the throttle quadrant photograph, and there you have the friction adjuster here at the bottom. So I replicated that, and a lot of the components here basically came down to wood dowel, which I buy. It's great. Wood dowel you can use for so many different things, and this is a really good way to buy it. This is 40 pieces. It's broken out here in diameters and lengths. Essentially they're all 12 inches long. You can buy them in 3-foot rods too from different places, but I like buying this assortment because, as I said, it gives you a lot of versatility, all the pieces and parts you can make, and what I use this stuff for is knobs and dials, elements of a cockpit, or elements of landing gear, or elements of just about anything where there's something round or cylindrical, excuse me. So the oxygen regulator is made of dowel and aluminum tubing. So these are 3 diameters of wood dowel. The aluminum tubing is under the hose. I thought I'd be able to see it a little better than we can, but anyway, I used aluminum tubing for the fitting for that, and then the hose itself is just solder wrapped around a tool handle. I think I used the file, wrapped it around tightly, and shaped it like a hose. To the eye, it you can't tell what it looks like a hose. Let's get the pilot out of there so we can see a little better. There we go. So that's essentially it. And I use solder for the bezels around the instrument dial faces, as I showed you on an earlier video. A couple of videos I've done that. Right, and then all the other parts, the black boxes as we call them, are just basically made out of either thick balsa like this, or laminations of whatever you've got available. If I stack 3 or 4 of these together, I end up with the same thing. And occasionally I'll use the bendy ply, birch ply, or cardstock for some elements. In the case of the map box, or the document case right down here, I wrap that with cardstock to replicate the flap lid of it, and so on. You can't really see it, it's lost in the dark there, but that detail is there, it's present. Okay, so that's going to be the cockpit right there. That's it. Seats glued in. I could make harnesses, a seat harness for the pilot, but as you can see, his posture in the cockpit, he's leaning pretty far forward. See if I can get him in there again. Here we go. You see this is quite a stretch here out to his shoulders and then down. It does need to be there needs to be something, so I'll have to come up with some way of doing that, wrapping that harness out and around the shoulders and down. They can pretty much disappear once they get into the waist area, so I'll probably just slot the pilot's torso on each side, run the straps over the shoulder and into the slots on either side, and that should take care of the look we're after for that. This posture is not uncommon for P-47 pilots. I see a lot of photographs where the aviator is sitting pretty far forward like that. But you can see through the canopy, and there'll be a frame painted here and in all the usual places that a canopy frames and windscreen frames would be painted on. The tape is just there for reference. I wanted to make sure I had these low enough. Essentially, that's why I put them right at the bottom of the canopy. But it's just so I could make sure that I wasn't somewhere in the glass area when I was attaching those. But you can see this is like a goldfish bowl. An observer will be able to see quite a bit. Now, the way I'm going to do the combing on the over the panel, we want a bit of overhang. So what I'll be doing is laying a strip of tape across here, the wide tape, painter's tape, not this stuff, but we'll lay a strip across, set the canopy in place like so, and then trace that outline, right? We'll make it about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch long, so that it overhangs the panel. And then we'll make a cutout in it for the gun sight, so that we don't interfere with the mounting area for the gun sight. And then we'll paint that in the appropriate anti-glare black, brown rubber, black rubber, sort of a charcoaly color, sun faded because it's up here on top in the sunlight all day, so it'll be kind of a charcoal color. Okay, let's see. And I don't think I'll be I won't be doing that until after I've got the aircraft painted. We won't be putting, but that's how I'll get the anti-glare panel. Everything will be done, painted, before we go to glue this windscreen and then affix the canopy so it can slide. But before we do that, I'll do the method I just described to get the anti-glare panel in there. And for that, again, we'll just use cardstock. I'll transfer the tape outline onto the cardstock. We'll trim it just inside the lines that I have, so that it's inside of the canopy, not or the windscreen, and not holding it off. If that follows, if you follow me there, and then and we'll do that. But that'll be a step, hopefully, that we have on camera, or at least that I just do another short video on. So I know people are curious how do you get that? How do you get the anti-glare in there perfectly, and not have part of it out here and part of the paint scheme inside there and all that other stuff. So that's just how it's done. What else? I guess that's it. It looks like at this point I can start working on the wing, and that'll be a big project, getting the wing completed. First, of course, I'll need to frame it up, make sure we get the dihedral right, and then we'll need to start taking a look at that operational landing gear and flaps. So it's going to be a project, but this was a project too. This fuselage was pretty involved. This is probably, to date, the most involved fuselage, I think, in my view, that I've worked on, between the cockpit, the engine and front end, and fairing these plastic parts, in and around getting the proper shape and getting that smooth. There's a lot of elements to this, but you can see that's not a bad effect. And then we've got a cockpit. We've got an outfitted cockpit there. Pretty good. Looks like a P-47, and a pilot happy in his element, maybe. Again, it's just for fun. We're just doing this for the challenge of it, I guess. But lots of work, lots of functioning elements will be in the wing. Getting the flaps to work, getting the landing gear to function, having it be lockable both in the up and down position, using the machine gun barrel as a pin, a locking pin. So what they recommend is the P-47 was an 8-gun platform. It had 4 50 caliber machine guns in each wing. For the operation of the landing gear, the retractable landing gear, what they did was they have you create a pin, a locking pin, using one of the machine gun barrels. Most likely, I think it's the longest one. And what you do is you pull it out, and it unlocks the landing gear wire, and you can drop the gear, and then you push it back in, and it locks the gear down. And then based on how this wire is bent, that's why this thing is kind of bananas. And then that's going to be tricky in and of itself, getting these upper bends correct. And then when you drop the gear, you push the machine gun barrel back in, and it locks the gear down, and so on. So we'll see if I can get that to work. That's the next big challenge. That's our next big challenge. Yeah, it looks like it's the longest barrel that they're using for the locking pin. And you just pull that out, and that releases the landing gear here so that it can drop. And then once it's dropped, a different section of the wire is present, and then the pin traps that wire, and then that gear is locked down. So, again, I've got to really take a hard look at all that stuff, and I've kind of scanned it and looked at it a bit, but we'll be taking a real hard look at that. And if I end up doing it the way they recommend, that's one thing. But one way or another, this airplane will have retractable main landing gear to go with its retractable tail wheel. Okay, so we got features on this one. This is let's see, this is the first one that's had features. Well, the Flyline Stearman had shock absorbers. It had functioning suspension in its landing gear. But I think aside from that, I haven't really done much of the feature thing. There's two schools about that. Some people think, well, it's just a waste of time. It's an exercise only and not practical, and therefore not worth the time. And others say, well, these challenges, that's something to tackle. That's something to achieve, through skill and daring. But yeah, I don't know. It's for me, this project. This is probably the only time I'll do it. I wanted a decent P-47 representation. I have a lot of. There's a handful of warbirds that I hold in esteem, and mostly it's well, I'll tell you, the P-40, the F-4F Wildcat, and the P-47, and those are the U.S. planes that I consider the best, for whatever reason. To me, the P-47 and the P-51 are similar to what happened in Britain with the Spitfire and Hurricane. The Spitfire got all the glory, but the Hurricane carried the brunt of that load, and it's kind of the same thing here. The P-47 slogging it out. The P-51 comes along with its brand new Merlin engines, and that's all anybody can talk about. And that's fine. I mean, P-51 is a fine airplane, but I like the P-47. I like the Juggernaut, and so that's why I'm taking this one on and doing a little bit extra with it. So another thing is, I'm not sure how much this canopy will open. The reason I made these rails sort of short, I didn't want to cut through two bulkheads. I didn't want to cut through this and these two formers. That would have really weakened this section of the fuselage right up in here, and so I didn't do that. So the canopy will slide back, but it'll probably only come to about here, just even with maybe the center of our pilot's head, which is fine. Landing, oftentimes they roll it back and lock it in place. Anytime you had to clear smoke out of a cockpit, you'd pop it back and let the draft take out any smoke that might have accumulated for whatever reason, fumes, vapor, smoke, that kind of thing. So not unusual to have a canopy partially open. Not something they recommended on landing.